So this is something slightly different.
Yeah.
When is a 1969 Camaro not quite a 1969 Camaro?
Well, I guess this would be the classic definition of a resto mod, wouldn't it?
Well, yes and no. This is more of a totally custom build than a resto mod,
Right.
where you've taken one or two components and you've updated them to give a vintage feel with modern mechanicals.
Right.
This is a purpose-built build by a fellow named Mark Stielow, who was the director of program engineering for General Motors.
Right.
And he built this car, which he calls the Mule, in 2001 for SEMA.
Right.
And it is an extraordinary bit of engineering with a fully integrated roll cage, a 389 cubic inch, 1,021 horsepower twin turbo V8 engine.
Based on the 350 block?
Based on the 350 block Chevy.
Right.
And with a very sophisticated multi-link suspension at all corners. And this is something that not only, because we've seen a lot of very high-powered cars built for the show circuit with a lot of fancy componentry, but this is a car that was meant to drive. It has completed 5 cross-country drives, power drives.
Okay.
So now my idea of a cross-country drive and Mark Stielow's idea of a cross-country drive might be slightly different.
Right.
But the fact that this car was built to actually do that is extraordinary. And he named it the Mule because of his time at General Motors, where development cars are frequently called mules because they contain various components being tested.
Well, it feels very tight. And the fact that the horn works shows it's way more than an ordinary show car, because horns never work in show cars. You know,
Exactly.
they never get around to doing turn signals and lights and horns and all that kind of stuff.
All the practical everyday things.
I haven't had a chance to test the suspension, but it feels, it feels like a solid billet car, you know.
Well, this is a good test of the suspension, driving over these somewhat broken roads that have been dug up and repaved. And the car itself certainly seems solid. We're getting a rattle from someplace, but I think that's probably the belts on the back of the roll cage. It certainly has more suspension compliance than I ever would have dreamed it would have. That's for sure. And one of the other things which, you know me and design, one of the other things that really impresses me about this car and has always drawn me to this car when I see it in the collection is the way it's built. It is built so incredibly carefully, and the design is so well integrated. It's sort of what if the stylists and designers who had created the 69 Corvette had been given their way when it came to production engineering. This is what a 69 Camaro would have looked like.
Right, it's not flashy.
The fit and finish, though, is amazing.
Yeah,
I mean, the panel fit, the way the bumpers fit, and to that point, the overall appearance of this car is such that they actually brought this car back into GM design when they were working on the 5th generation Camaro as an inspiration for the designers to look at. And GM actually gave it a special award.
I don't know how old these tires are, but they break loose at the slightest provocation.
The tires are 2 years old, but they are very slick tires to begin with.
Yeah.
They have grooves that are there more for decoration than anything else. Well, it certainly feels like 1,000 horsepower. How's the steering feel?
Steering feels great. Gear shift is very purposeful.
It's got a 6-speed gearbox.
It's still 20 years old, and turbo lag has all but been eliminated in this new century.
Absolutely.
So it still gets a bit of that, because when you put your foot in it, you feel it begin to spool, and then you get your influx of power.
It's always a very interesting thing in a car like this. It's obviously good to know what your boost is, but there's a lot going on in a car like this very quickly that a boost gauge is not something you can actually study as you drive.
Right. Let's see, I'm in second gear.
That hit the rev limiter?
Huh?
Did I hit the rev limiter?
No, I wasn't watching.
I think for a 2001 build,
Yes.
the performance is pretty impressive. You know, it doesn't match the performance of a twin turbo production car from 2023.
No.
But and you know, that's the other interesting thing, that manufacturers, I mean, you really see this in the truck market, but manufacturers have been able to get so much performance out of smaller and smaller engines,
Right.
and with less horsepower and a better balance of horsepower, torque, a more balanced torque curve, you know?
Yeah, when a turbo kicks in, you really feel it. But it takes a half second.
Like a Saab 99 on steroids.
Yeah. But it all feels very solid. Clicks right into gear. Suspension feels great. Brakes feel great. Steering is terrific. I love the steering wheel. I love the size of the car. I think we're running on pump gas, right? We're not running on...
No, this is running on...
Is it race fuel?
It's running on race fuel, yeah.
Wow. I don't see 1,000 horsepower, I'm sorry.
I think you're right. It's when after the turbos spool up, and again, this is not the road for that.
Right.
But the we were there on the straight. I think I could feel certainly a good amount of that. Although that's another interesting thing. You and I discussed this before. The horsepower gauge in the Bugatti Veyron, and when you think you're giving it a lot of power, you're actually maybe using 400, 450 horsepower.
Right.
And you know, to really use the 1,000, you're really going fast. And sustaining that speed.
Fantastic. You can tell it's built by an engineer.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're launching a little bit. To get it on the spool, it's all right.
It's interesting to think about those cross-country drives. I've got to do a little more studying and see what the routes they took were. Because to take a group of very high ultra-performance cars and drive them cross-country, I would guess that you'd have to use a lot of interstate, because there are not a lot of two-lane U.S. routes that you can use a car like this on, you know?
You know, you can drive this like a regular car.
Uh-huh.
That's the nice thing about it is, I mean, I'm driving it like it's a regular Camaro, and it feels like a regular Camaro. Admittedly, a little tighter, a little better built, but very nice. It's not, I'm not on the cam, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of times you get these SEMA builds, and they work at 6,500 RPM, and anything other than that.
Yeah, idling is a theoretical concept.
Right. This is what I would build, a car that looks reasonably stock, but has all these performance modifications. I prefer modifications you can't see to ones you can see. You know, a lot of cars have an outrageous body and everything. It's okay, but they don't drive very nice. this drives really nice. I can see driving this cross country because if you're not on those turbos, she's running cool. You know, you're not spinning at 22,000 RPM and getting all kinds of heat on the turbos all the time.
Yeah.
Only when you're on it. So it's actually a very nice driving car, very comfortable. I mean, it's firm, but it's no harsher than a Porsche. You know,
that's absolutely true.
In the sport mode, I mean, it's really quite good.
Yeah, and
this is exactly what I would build. With all the oohs and ahs when you open the hood. You know, and you see the twin turbos and all the beautiful header work.
Actually, interestingly enough, even under the hood, it seems more engineer workman-like than show car.
Right, because there's not a lot of chrome and that type of thing. But you see the way you look at the welds on the headers, and they're beautifully done.
Right.
And they curve around the automobile, so there's a flow. There's no short term. When you look at the header, you don't see blue spots where the heat is hitting it and deflecting. It's the heat is coming all the way around. You know. No, that's a wonderful car.
Well, let me take a turn at the wheel and
let's give it a shot.
See what I think.
I mean, we're in a tourist area, so you have to be a little socially responsible. But it's quite impressive.
We'll find a spot later where you can do a burnout.
Especially for a 20-year-old. Yeah, we do a burnout.
You know, it's just proof positive that I only limit myself when I let expectations dictate reality.
Yeah.
This is not at all what I expected this car to feel like. And I'm happy for that, because I just love the concept of this car, and the fact that it is this drivable at this level is to me absolutely remarkable. And a tribute to the builder. Sort of like a certain kind of an earthquake. You can actually hear the turbos start before you actually feel them.
Yeah.
And the other thing, of course, is the fact that this car is running on very wide tires. I mean, they're tubbed tires in the back.
Right. Hey guys.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't deliver its power and the driving experience the way a modern high-performance car with 1,000 horsepower would.
Yeah.
But it is extremely, to me, impressive how tractable it is. You know, we always talk about that, the usability of a car. You read the specs on this car and you think, okay, it's going to be all but undrivable.
Right, no, not at all.
Huh. What it does do, however, it makes you want to drive faster. Even on this bit of a broken road, the front end never feels like it's going to give away. Very, very, very impressive.
Quite nicely.
Yeah. I am so incredibly impressed.
Yeah, it's great.
Oh my God, wow. First and foremost, I want to say how much I admire your work. You do
Oh, thanks.
extremely beautiful builds, and it's one thing. It's a very funny thing. People make assumptions about my automotive tastes. People think, oh, Donald only likes Italian sports cars from the 1950s and 60s, which is not true. I like a lot of things. And one of the things, however, the first thing that many people are connected to with a car is the aesthetic. And your aesthetic is absolutely, I think, astonishing. And I was chatting with my friend, oh God, here we go. That's absolutely funny. My close personal friend, Ed Welburn, thank you. And
oh, yes, I know Ed real well.
Indeed, and we were talking about your work and the Mule in particular, because for me, the first generation Camaro is among the most beautiful cars ever to come out of Detroit. And I commented on the fact that I said, well, Mark built a car that was constructed the way the stylists wished that their designs had been constructed. And so I think that the combination of the aesthetic and the incredibly detailed engineering is what makes your build so special. So how did you come to decide to do the kind of work that you're doing outside of your regular job, as it were?
You know, it all started, I've always been kind of a hot rodder, and when I came into GM, I built cars that I wanted to race in, car and drivers one lap of America, and it was very form follows function. Like I wanted a car that I could drive on the street, but also needed to be track capable. So that, and then I always read Hot Rod Magazine and all the magazines, and I always kind of strive for that aesthetic that is a clean, engineered look. So the cars have always been functional because I wanted to try to use them at open track, but I've always kind of had a little bit of an artistic eye where I wanted to have things, the colors right, the kind of assembly clean and purposeful.
And one of the things that endears you to me so much is the fact that I'm very well known and quite outspoken about the fact that I don't understand a lot of the modern track day car thing, where you have a car which is theoretically optimized for the track, but road legal, but is not very satisfying on the road, and not the ultimate track weapon either. So it's sort of, it loses in both places. And I think that, again, I'll just speak to the Mule, the only one of your cars I've actually driven. It is so incredibly well balanced. I never forget the fact that this is actually a car you can use, and yet it has this capable power and prowess.
Yeah, I mean, that car was actually, I sold it to a good friend of mine, Charlie Lillard, and he drove it on 4 or 5 hot rod power tours with his wife. So not only was it a track capable car that we ran at Thunder Hill out in California and a couple other open track days, but you know, like he drug his wife along on multiple cross country tours and the thing. So, and I drove it on a couple things too. So,
and it's one of the things Jay and I often joke about, the fact that I have this sort of Donald Osborne test. You know, would I get in this car and drive it across the country? And Jay will say, well, there are some cars I just want to drive for 15 to 20 minutes to put it away. I said, well, that's fine, but that's not me. And it's one of the other things that, you know, we've driven some other high performance custom builds, Pro Touring, and we're going to talk about Pro Touring in a second. And they are not, they may be very well designed, they may be very well screwed together, but they're not real cars. And the fact that, you know, the Mule has 12,000 miles on it now, it's a car. You can actually use it, and it also seems to reflect at the highest possible level, something which I discovered a number of years ago. A magazine sent me out to an import tuner show at Pomona Raceway. And they thought, oh, this is going to be really funny. Donald with his bow tie is going to a tuner show. Ha, 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 ha. I said, you know, look, don't write my story before I've written it myself. And I went and I met these folks, many of them very young, and they were absolutely fantastic. And they took a very different approach to building their cars than a lot of other people with a lot more money and a lot less sense do, because they started with the suspension, and then they upgraded the engine, and then they turned to the interior, then they turned to the exterior. They didn't just sort of put this really fancy paint job on a car, then threw a chip in it and tripled the horsepower without thinking about anything else about the balance of the car. And your builds are all about balance, and that's obviously a part of your GM background, the fact that you are an actual engineer and need to make things work. So how do you approach a vehicle build in terms of saying, what is the balance you want from the vehicle?
Kind of back up a little bit. The reason the car was called the Mule is that GM early development vehicles are called test mules. So I wanted this car to be kind of a test bed for different things I was working on. And whenever you start off on a project, you got to kind of have a vision, like what are you going to do with it? And so my goal with that car was I wanted to be able to do open track days. I wanted to be able to use it on things like Power Tour and things like that. So literally it was like, well, what are available size tires? At that time, a 335 rear tire was on the Viper, just came out, and a 275 was the matching front. And I kind of designed the car around that tire and wheel package because that was what was commercially available, and the look and the stance and the performance I wanted. And you look at that car from the rear three quarter with that big tire on the back of it, and it just has a broad, muscular look. But also when you take it to a track, it's got what the power it makes and everything else. You need that kind of a package to make it all work. So then that drove the suspension, which drove I had to design a 4-link rear suspension for the back of it because I had to ditch the leaf spring. So the whole tire selection was kind of the genesis on how that car came together in 2001.
And that speaks directly to what I was just talking about, the fact that you literally envisioned the car from the ground up, and as opposed to the engine compartment out, which is what people who don't know what they're doing typically do. And to that point as well, I know that the car, as it currently sits in the collection here, is in its second engine stage. Talk to us a little bit about how the car was originally built and what the difference in that package and the package it has now might be.
So when I first built it, I had an all aluminum, naturally aspirated 406 cubic inch small block with Kinsler fuel injection because I wanted it to be a very lightweight GT touring style car. And when I weighed it, I think it weighed 3,150 pounds. So wow. I tried to keep the mass down on the car as much as possible. And it was a very nimble, lightweight car, and and the Kinsler IR gave it a very unique 60s feel to the engine bay. So the engine bay looked, the part. But when I sold the car to Charlie, he's like, "Well, it's really not. I like sledgehammer cars. I want to supersize this thing." So we enlisted the guys at the time Wheel to Wheel in Troy, Michigan. And I worked with Kurt Urban, and we decided to take the basic engine that was in there, keep the Kinsler IR, build that kind of an aesthetic look for the induction, and make the engine bay look very organic, very symmetric. The turbos were set up, and the way the exhaust was done, when you pop the bay, it's got engine compartment's got I think it's got a nice visual appeal to it. But we did a nice small frame turbos that we could clear 1,000 horsepower with, and then it became the sledgehammer that Charlie wanted. So the rest of the car was hardened. The drive line was good enough for 1,000 horse. And then once we started kind of really leaning on it, then we started really discovering some cooling issues when you try to race a 1,000 horsepower car. But we eventually got there. So.
And that's one of the things, again, I must compliment you on. I'm not a horsepower guy. I always think that it's all about the package, power to weight ratio, the horsepower to torque, all those things. And I have to say that it is a very manageable car still to drive on the roads in Rhode Island with 1,000 horsepower, and there are a lot of 1,000 horsepower cars that do not start to work at all until you are going well over extra legal speeds. So it's still
I forget the size turbos we put on. It's been a minute, but yeah, we did a fairly decent displacement on the engine side, so it'd have good drivability. Then the boost just kind of adds to the power curve. So it's still drivable with the small frame turbos, but it doesn't have huge turbo lag. So.
And now, what would be involved? Just saying, what would be involved in returning it to the original specification?
That wouldn't be too hard at all. I mean, you would just have to. We'd leave the louvered hood because we added the louvered hood later for the heat management. but putting it back to I could call it Jim Kinsler, get the same induction we had on it before, and it could be put back pretty easily.
And what would the difference in the drivability experience of the car be?
You'd lose probably 150, 175 pounds off the nose of the car. It'd just become a lot more nimble. It wouldn't have that, that roll-on fifth gear explosive power it has now. It'd be, just be more a lighter, more of a Porsche 911 feel to the car versus, kind of the angry animal it is now. So, I mean, it's a lot of fun to drive now with the big power because it'll flat get out of its own way. So,
it's interesting. We were talking about weight before, and the car in its original iteration basically weighed about 100 pounds less than a Cayman GT4 with a heck of a lot more power. So it's very interesting to think about the balance and to talk about pro touring, because it's something that a lot of people are familiar with and a lot of people aren't quite familiar with. And at the museum right now, as the time we're making this video, we've got an exhibition called Not Just American Muscle. And we're sort of putting the cat among the pigeons with a lot of different cars and letting people decide and debate what a muscle car is. And it's a very interesting thing because part of the discussion becomes one of attitude, of course, and sort of, big engine and small body and that. But the typical sort of conventional wisdom is that, muscle cars go fast in a straight line, but they don't turn. Your car turns like a dream. It's a wonderful car to drive. And you want to find that sort of slightly diving off camber turn because it can handle it, and you just put your foot down and it goes. So is that the definition of what a pro touring car is? The thing that will do it all?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I coined the term back in 1999 because I was at the SEMA show and I saw it was an article that said this yet unnamed phenomena, and I was like, well, you got pro street. You got hot rod power tour. You kind of put those two things together. You got pro touring, and for me, a pro touring car is like that aesthetic of the old car, but you can still take it to a Porsche open track day and run with those guys. And I have the most fun going to a Viper Club event or a Corvette or a Porsche event, and these guys will walk over after the first session and be like, "That old car goes that fast," and I always meet a lot of new people and have a lot of fun with, being able to go out and mix it up with people who don't think an old car should be able to do that. So, but my definition of a pro touring car is still that car that you can take to an open track day, but you can also take on hot rod power tour or drive cross country on some of these car cruises, and it'll have air conditioning so that your wife wants to go along or your spouse, and it makes it more comfortable, and it's an approachable car that's more grand touring, but still hardened enough for open track days.
And the fact that GM not only acknowledged but celebrated your work, certainly all of your work, but especially with this car, bringing it back to the studio and having it be an influence, we're told, for the designers of the last generation Camaro. I mean, that's also got to be very heartening and gratifying for you as well. Yeah,
I mean, I always dreamed when I was a young person in high school that I wanted to work for GM, Ford, or Chrysler and help write some chapters of automotive history. And I've been able to do that in a very small way. And it agrees. I mean, it's like my childhood dream come true. Like I really was able to live that vision I had when I was in high school and back in Missouri of being at the, I read all the magazines, I read all the books, and now I'm able to write some of those chapters, which is pretty fascinating.
Well, again, I give you great compliments. The proof is in the product. It's wonderful that, and hopefully that you are somebody who can inspire other people who are building interesting cars on how to approach this, a way to both take leaps forward while still staying true to the heritage and spirit of the original car, because I feel, and I could be totally off base, but I feel this is sort of the idea of, in 1969, if the engineers and designers on the program could do whatever they wanted to do, they would have created a car like yours, or it would be what it would be built as today, and it's not sort of an empty sort of modern tribute. It looks like, but it doesn't behave like. It's what we all wanted that Camaro to be when it was new.
Yeah, I talk to people all the time when they're starting off their projects. Like, have a vision what you want to do with it, and then a lot of the decisions will kind of make their, it'll help you clear up what you want to do. Like all the little decisions along the way will clear up when you kind of like, I want to use this car for X. And if it's just like, I want to do a 100-point restoration and go for Bloomington Gold on a Corvette, great. That's what you're doing. That's your journey. That's your vision. But if you want to do something that's, whatever your dream is, at the end of the day, this is just, we don't need any of these things. These are just fun things to enjoy.
Well, I'm very, very, very happy that we get to live your dreams, Mark, because they're so brilliantly executed, and they're a very fun place to be. So we're looking forward to having you come to the Audrain and visit with us. It would be a great honor. So we have to figure out how and when to get you here.
Yeah, my wife and I were just talking about that at lunch today. We're going to find a time to fly over and come over and see you guys. We have friends in the area, so I think it would be great to catch up with, meet some new people, and kind of catch up with the car again.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking this time, Mark, and we are so thrilled to have the Mule here at the Audrain and to be able to share it with as many people as you possibly can.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure to meet you. I've followed your stuff for years, and I've always been a big fan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mutual Admiration Society. It's perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.